Right, thank you very much, Professor Kato, for inviting me today and giving me this chance to talk about something I think is very important. So, my name is Ben Sheeran. I know quite a few people here. Thank you very much for coming to see me. If I don't know you, I'm from England originally, but I grew up in Spain, so I grew up bilingual. And then at secondary school, in junior high school and high school, I had the chance to study French and German and Latin in an academic setting. And then at university, I was able to study Chinese also in an academic setting. So I'm a language learner and I'm a language teacher. I don't know anything about anything else. Okay, so I'm not an engineer, I'm not a teacher, I'm not a specialized teacher, I don't have an educational background. I just know about languages. And today, I'd like to talk about languages. So, I think this is the most important part of my speech. Why do we need effective language education? And I'd like to answer that with a short video, which I hope will show us this. How many people are familiar with TED? So this is a website. It has thousands of very interesting speeches and talks about all sorts of topics. Today, I'd like to show you the end of this one, assuming we can get the audio working here.
So is English mania good or bad? Is English a tsunami washing away other languages? Not likely. English is the world's second language. Your native language is your life, but with English you can become part of a wider conversation, a global conversation about global problems, like climate change, or poverty, or hunger, or disease. The world has other universal languages. Mathematics is the language of science. Music is the language of emotions. And now English is becoming the language of problem solving, not because America is pushing it, but because the world is pulling it. So English mania is a turning point. Like the harnessing of electricity in our cities or the fall of the Berlin Wall, English represents hope for a better future. A future where the world has a common language to solve its common problems. Thank you very much.
So even if you don't agree with his full message there, I think we can agree that the world has changed and that English is no longer an optional skill. It's no longer something that makes you interesting or that means that you have an interesting background. But it's a very basic, fundamental skill. Last year I went to Singapore, and as I was queuing up to go through immigration, there's a Japanese family in front of me, and they couldn't answer the immigration officer's questions in English. So I helped them a little bit. But it just goes to show that it really is a basic, fundamental skill to have that English ability. And today, I'd like to talk about how we can help our students acquire it. And not only has the world changed, but also employers are changing. These are probably the most famous ones in Japan. I think the Rakuten president said to his employees, learn English or find a new job. Very harsh, very harsh. But I think this is going to be the reality more and more in the future. Possibly most importantly, technology has also changed. For me, this is the most exciting part. Because of recent changes in the internet, students now can learn foreign languages, spending no money, and they can learn it very effectively in a much shorter time than they could in the past. Using technology, using websites, using online resources, and it's all free. Recently, there have been lots of famous bloggers who have learned Japanese to a very high level in about 2 years' time without leaving America, without teachers, without textbooks, just by using the internet. And I think this just shows us the possibilities ahead. Now, unfortunately, everything's changing, but university language classes have not. If you look at the compulsory language classes at Tohoku University, so the first years and the second years, learning English, you'll find all students are in a classroom with between 30 and 80 students, with a teacher talking at the front. And there are no alternatives to this pattern. There are no very small group classes. There are no very big classes. There are no online classes. And all of these can be much more effective in delivering language education. And what I mean by effective is this: the best results for the least amount of time or effort. Most of my students are not English specialists, and they don't want to be, but they do want practical English skills. And for them, this least amount of time is very important. And I think if we look at this, I don't think there is such a thing as effective language teaching, because you cannot teach a language. It's a skill. It's like a sport. You can help students learn, you can give them advice, but the students have to learn it. You can't teach it to them. I think this is the principle of my teaching. And the goal of language teaching is it leads to students becoming language users, people who can use the language. And one problem in Japan, so Mr. Eichhorst mentioned this earlier, is the lack of role models. I think a very big problem for Japanese students is that they only have two types of role models. One is the native speaker, like me, and the other is the very specialized Japanese English teacher. And neither of these are appropriate role models for students. Much better model, I'd just like to show you another quick video, is, so I found this on YouTube by accident, but I liked it so much that I saved it.
Book reading scan. We would like to scan the book just by this flipping motion. So this system captures the shape and the image on the page at frame rate.
So that video, I don't know this man. I just found this video completely by accident. But I think this is the kind of role model that our students should be looking at. So his English is not perfect. He has an accent. He makes grammatical mistakes. But he's extremely effective at communicating what he needs to. And he's a realistic role model for the students. The students will not gain native level ability in English. Very few people have that potential. And the students will not gain the kind of level that high-level Japanese English teachers have. But they don't need to either. And the fact that these role models are so far out of reach is extremely damaging, I think, to Japanese students. We need to show them realistic role models that are achievable, a level that they can hope to gain within 2 years or 3 years at university. without spending too much time or effort. I think effective language instruction encourages the students to be independent as quickly as possible. To learn a language takes a lot of time, possibly thousands of hours. So the students need 2,000 or 3,000 hours of input. There is no way that we can give them enough classes to do this. So the students need to do it by themselves. They need to do it at home, they need to do it by watching movies, by watching YouTube videos, by listening to podcasts, to lectures in English. And they can only do this by themselves. So we need to give them the resources, show them where to find English materials, and encourage them to do it. And this, hopefully, will result in lifelong learners. Because if students are going to be English users, they're going to have to continue learning and practicing and using English for the rest of their life. So it's not a class, it's not one semester with Mr. Sheeran, it's you for the rest of your life. And I think we need to get this message across to the students as quickly as possible. So let's talk about the current situation in Japan. This is something that I hear quite often. Okay, Japanese students are not good at speaking, but they can read and write in English. And in my experience, this is absolutely not true. Japanese students in a conventional educational setting, so junior high school, university, have very few opportunities to write in English. Up until the end of high school, hardly any students write more than a few sentences in English. Even in university, students don't have the chance to write essays or reports or formal writing. It's mostly constrained to the kansobu, right? Your reaction to things, your feelings about a topic. But it doesn't extend to academic writing. And this is in Japanese as well. So it's not so much the fact that the students can't write in English, it's that they can't write at all. And again, with reading, most students only read short passages. They don't have the experience of reading articles or books in English. So what do students need? I would argue that undergraduate students entering university need huge amounts of input, and they need a chance for meaningful output, speaking and writing. And they also need a chance to take more specialized classes later, if they want to. This is the language scale used in Europe now. This is the Council of Europe framework of reference for languages, and it's designed to describe language ability. It starts at A1, the beginner level, and goes all the way to C2. Just to give you an idea, C2 is described as better than native speaker. So it's very, very high. And according to ETS, the company that produces the TOEFL test, these are the minimum scores on the TOEFL ITP that students must reach to be able to be classified at these levels. And these are last year's TOEFL scores for Tohoku University. As you can see, 20% of students do not reach this intermediate level in the first year. And only 5% reach upper intermediate. Now this is very meaningful because A, I believe that the TOEFL ITP exaggerates the English ability of students. Because of the nature of the test, the ITP has listening and reading only. There is not a writing component, and there is not a speaking component. And I think those two sections are the weakest for Japanese students. So these test results are generous. The other factor is that I find that students' English ability drops during their university career. It is highest when they enter the university, because they've just finished studying for their entrance tests. And for most students, their ability declines through their university career. This is the description for the B2 level. And I think this is a realistic target for students to achieve by the time they leave university. So as you can see, they can understand text, they can interact with native speakers without strain, and they can produce detailed text. They can write about things. I think with this level, students would be able to work in an international context. I'd like to talk about a few things that I think are unnecessary for language teaching. I think, so again, Mr. Eichhorst mentioned this earlier. I often hear in Japan that students need to learn these skills in English class. And I think that is ridiculous. Students need to learn these skills in their native language, and then they can practice them in English as an additional skill. But to learn the basics of working in groups, of discussion, of presentation, of academic writing, or even of ethics in terms of quoting sources correctly or plagiarizing, is incredible to me. And I think the fact that some students don't have the chance to study these things before reaching them in English class is a very severe failing. I don't think specialized test preparation is useful for the basic level of students. Using a specialized test preparation class, students can gain a few points on a test, but they will not improve their English level by gaining points on a test. So I think to begin with, they need to improve their level, and later they can try and push their test scores up a little bit. And more grammar instruction. I think by the time they reach university, students have had enough grammar instruction. They have a good knowledge of grammar, they don't need much more, unless they plan to become a teacher or they're studying linguistics. Very few of my students are in these categories. I would also say that most students do not need to study literature in the original form in English, unless they're going to become a teacher or they're studying literature. So, what is an effective system? So I've told you what I don't think is necessary. I'd now like to talk about what we should be doing in language classes. And I think this is very important, to have a structure that gives everybody the basics at the beginning, and then allows the students that want to, the students that can, and the students that have the ambition to go further, to give them the chance to do so. So we'll have core classes, maybe in the first and second year, that teach the students how to learn. Many students don't know how to learn. They want to learn, they have the motivation to do so, but they don't know how to. So we need to teach them that and give them lots of input and output. I see my students, and this is partially based on the TOEFL scores earlier, so 20% of students are struggling with English. So they're at a lower level than the other students, and they're struggling with the classes. And 70% of students are normal, and 10% are advanced. Now, why are these students in the same class? Would you put elementary school students and junior high school students together? Probably not. So I would like to see more streaming of language classes. So the students that need extra help or easier material get it. And the students that can go much further are allowed to do so. I think we need a strong self-access centre. Tohoku University has a few different language resource centres, but there's no unified language centre. This is the self-access centre at Kanda University. It's very famous in Japan. It's an amazing facility. And if you're interested, I'd recommend looking at their website or visiting. They're very happy to welcome visitors. I think we should provide optional specialized courses. Things like debate, discussion, negotiation, presentation, academic writing. But again, optional for students that have the level to do this and students who have the motivation to do this. We should help students gain qualifications. And most importantly, we should teach the students how to learn independently. Finally, I'd like to talk about the measuring things clearly. This is often known as a Drucker quote, but it's actually, it goes back much further than Drucker. Basically, we need to measure our success with language. And there's a few ways we can do that. We can use national or international tests. As we mentioned, lots of companies like to look at TOEIC scores. I think the University of Cambridge tests are some of the most practical ones, but they're expensive and time-consuming. I think looking at tests can give us some numbers to use as a metric. We can encourage the students to create learning portfolios. So this is a collection of your work. So some examples of writing, some examples of speaking, maybe videos, your test results, and your CV kind of thing. And the students would have a portfolio that they could show to potential employers to show their skill in the language. And we can look at employment outcomes. So as Mr. Eikos mentioned earlier, the students want to know which companies want English and how many students were successful because of their English skills. This will provide them with motivation. Okay, I think I have 2 minutes left, so I'd be happy to take any questions at this point.
Thank you very much.